Warning, this podcast contains spoilers for House of the Dragon, Episode 5. Dragons have arrived on HBO Max. Have you been aware of this? Did you know that this is the case? Episode 5 now gone by. The new HBO original series House of the Dragon is a prequel set 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon tells the story of House Targaryen locked in an epic battle for the Iron Throne and power over the Seven Kingdoms. The epic series promises more drama and betrayal than ever. Listen to the official Game of Thrones podcast, House of the Dragon, on HBO Max, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts. And to celebrate, we're bringing back Ask the Maester to answer your questions.
Question number 1 this week comes from John. Why did Damon marry Rhea Royce? The Royces are not a particularly powerful house and are not the Lords of the Vale. What political benefit was gained from this marriage? As we march towards the dance, it seems war could have been avoided if Damon and Rhaenyra wed.
I think you're right, but the thing to understand about this is it wasn't Damon's choice. That's why he's so mad about it. And of course, he's a generally unreliable, just chaotic, joker-fied human being. But it was not his choice to make. Daemon and Viserys are the sons of Prince Balon the Brave, who was the fourth son of King Jaehaerys and good Queen Alysanne. Now, until Balon's tragic death, which I'll get to in a second, he was immensely popular as the heir apparent. Everybody agreed that this is a great choice, and Jaehaerys was happy with it as well. And so the betrothals of Balon's children would have been important vehicles of statecraft and would have been set up and decided by Jaehaerys with significant input from Alysanne, who was, as often, Jaehaerys' partner in this. And certainly Prince Balon would have had a say as well. Viserys was 16 years old. Now, understanding that the show has fudged with ages and years a little bit, in the books, Viserys was 16 when, in the year 93, he was wedded to the 11-year-old Aemma Arryn, herself a half Targaryen on her mother's side. The books helpfully point out that the union was not consummated for another 2 years when Emma was 13, so no problem at all.
Wow, no problem. That was a good choice. Oh, yeah. It's all good.
It's all better then. And Damon, when he was betrothed 4 years later in 97, was 16 years old when he wed Rhea, and we don't know her age at that time, and we certainly don't know how old she was when she was murdered by Damon. So, as for Rhaenyra, the show is fudged with the timelines. But according to the book, she was born the same exact year that Damon and Rhea were married in 97. So that wasn't really an option unless they were going to put a future hold on it, which, again, didn't seem necessary at that time. It's important to understand that though King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne were clearly aged, coming to the ends of their natural lives and certainly their reigns, the succession looked pretty solid at that time. Yes, the heir before Balon, Prince Aemon, who, again, solid choice, everybody thought was a pretty good choice as well. He was killed tragically fighting pirates on Tarth. He was hit by an arrow that was intended for another guy. But when Balon became the next up, everybody was like, this is great. He was a dragon rider, having claimed none other than Vhagar. He was extremely courageous. He earned the sobriquet the Brave because he playfully punched Valerian the Black Dread in the nose when he was like a child. And he was a great warrior. He was knighted at 16. He, by all accounts, acquitted himself quite well in the defense of the Dornish marches when he was 23, fighting there, repelling Dornish raiders from the Stormlands. He was close with his family, and his older siblings as well loved him, Aemon and Daenerys. And by the way, Alysanne thought Daenerys, actually the oldest of Jaehaerys and Alysanne's children, Alysanne significantly lobbied for Daenerys to be queen. It's like, she's our oldest. Why shouldn't she be queen? Jaehaerys ignored this, and most of the realm did too, but Alysanne argued for it. And then Balon was wedded to his sister Alyssa, who gave birth to their children, Viserys and Daemon. So it looked rock solid at that particular time. The nobles respected him, the people loved him, and his family loved him. So it seemed like Balon was going to be king and everything was great. And then he got a, quote, stitch in his side and then had what they're calling a burst belly. Was he poisoned? What happened? Was this truly just like a stomach ache gone bad? And then he died, appendix breaking. Yeah, we don't know. But he died of seemingly natural, some kind of natural malady, some kind of illness in 101. And that was basically the thing that set off the crisis that is now reaching its full measure with the story we're watching now. 101, of course, being the same year that they would eventually call the Great Council to figure out, okay, now who is actually going to succeed old King Jaehaerys now that Balon is off the board.
Jonathan comes with another good marriage question. I like the themes here. This is
different Jonathan.
Different Jonathan. We got John with the first marriage question, Jonathan with the second marriage question. And I really like this one. The Maester picks some good questions.
I like it too. It's a good one.
With the appearance of Rhea Royce on the show and the extensive discussion of political marriages, how was it that both Viserys and Daemon were matched with brides from the Vale? This seems like a concentration of Targaryen political capital in one part of Westeros, and I'm intrigued by the thought process behind the pairings.
This is a really, really interesting question. First of all, the Targaryens enjoyed good relations with the Vale from the start, back to the days of the conquest. The Vale, though it was preparing to fight, submitted bloodlessly because Visenya Targaryen, one of Aegon's sisters, took Ronald Arryn, the eventual heir of the Eyrie and the Vale, and the son of Queen Regent Shara Arryn, took him for a joyride, surprise joyride on her dragon a couple times, around the mountains, and whether it was like the implicit threat of seeing her child on the back of a dragon, though by all accounts, Ronald was delighted at this joyride, or because of real affection and real appreciation at being kind of approached in a way that wasn't immediately warlike. The Vale submitted. Fast forward to the years of Jaehaerys, Viserys' betrothal to Aemma Arryn, I think appears pretty straightforward in terms of like what inspired this. Roderick Arryn, Emma's father, Lord of the Eyrie, Defender of the Vale, had known Queen Alicent since they were children. Apparently they met very early on. And Roderick's sister was one of the Queen's very trusted ladies in waiting, who, as the histories make pains to point out, were extremely loyal to her, and she was beloved of them. And certainly Roderick, who ascended to Lord of the Vale at a very early age, would have probably had to okay that, would have had to send her there and say, that's fine. He was known as a really smart guy, uniquely kind, certainly in the context of Westeros. The fact that people are mentioning that he's kind and it's in the books that this is a kind and generous guy, that means something. And very clearly, Jaehaerys and Alicent trusted him. The king would name him Master of Laws after a breakout of a illness called the Shivers, which broke out during a winter that happened early in Jaehaerys' reign. It killed thousands, including the king and queen's daughter Daenerys, who was really beloved of them. And that was particularly a shock because it was thought that the Targaryens don't really get sick, that they played by different rules than everybody else. So that her death was shocking, and it also wiped out a bunch of the king's advisors. And so the king named Roderick Master of Laws because he trusted him and he needed new bodies in there. And when it came time to seek a betrothal for Princess Daela, Roderick was put forward as one of three options by the queen, clearly at the queen's behest, alongside Boromund Baratheon, who is the grandfather of the Lord of Storm's End in House of the Dragon right now, and Tywin Lannister, an ancestor of Jason and Tyland Lannister. Now, Roderick was clearly the dark horse candidate, not the best looking guy. They say that he's like balding. He's like 36. He has a beer belly. They take pains to mention that his body type and body shame him in the histories. And certainly, there's a Lannister in there. He's not the richest. But he'd been running the Vale for 20 years, since he was 16. So that's a mark in his favor. And again, the king and queen really liked him, trusted him, and having seen the way he comported himself as Master of Laws, thought that this is a competent, good guy with solid judgment who's, again, nice. The queen clearly preferred him, telling Daela that, listen, this is a kind and gentle man. He'll be an able protector. And then Daela, met with all the suitors and, shocking everyone except probably the queen, was like, yeah, that's the guy. I like him. He seems really gentle and kind. That's the dude. Now, she would then give birth to their child Emma, Viserys' eventual wife, in the year 82, and then, as a result of the birth, would die sometime after of a fever. This absolutely broke the queen's heart. And Lord Arryn as well, who really, really loved her. He wanted her buried in the Vale because he wanted to remain close to her. The queen was like, no, she's a Targaryen. We're going to cremate her according to family tradition and intern her, on Dragonstone. So that happens. And clearly, just imagining probably some hard feelings there between Lord Arryn and the crown because of that. He wanted to stay close to his wife. They said no. Alysanne, on her part, the queen, blamed everyone for Daela's death. She's like, the Maesters weren't good enough. Roderick could have done more. And also you, my husband, Jaehaerys, we should have let her stay a little longer in King's Landing. We shouldn't have, you pushing this marriage, this is your fault. And this actually caused a significant rift in their relationship. So thinking about that, and kind of rift, emotional rift at the very least between the Vale and the realm, and knowing how important purity of blood is to Targaryens, right? They want to keep the blood pure, right? And Emma was half Targaryen. So, one, why this marriage? Well, you're bringing a Targaryen home. You're bringing a half Targaryen back into the blood. And two, because of these potentially hard feelings between the crown and Roderick, here's a way to patch that up, right? Wed her to Viserys. Maybe we can patch this up. Maybe we can make this better. Daemon is maybe a little muddier, but also consider he was the second son. Yes, the heir in the spare says that, potentially you have Daemon around because he could ascend to the throne. So while I know we're saying the Royces aren't the house of the Vale, they're not the overlord of the Vale, it's still a good deal. Rhea is heir to Runestone, which is there's not, you would imagine there's probably a scarcity of opportunities for the second son, the not crown prince, to actually inherit a castle through the wedding deal. That might not happen. So I think what we're looking at is, one, the first marriage, Viserys and Emma, which just made political sense, and it was a way to bind up the wounds, potentially emotional wounds that Roderick Arryn had, and certainly politically bind the Vale closer to the crown. And for Daemon, I think it was a wedding of opportunity. He could, it befit his station. He become Lord of Runestone. And in such case that he would actually ascend to the throne, it's another good mark on him. Not to mention, going forward in our stories, it's mentioned in the world of Ice and Fire that as we exit the era of the Dance of the Dragons, which we're watching roll out now in House of the Dragon, there's going to be a little bit of Arryn blood in all the Targaryen rulers that follow. That's how closely the Vale and the Targaryen family are allied. So it actually makes sense in the context of the broader history.
Connor asks, speaking of bloodlines, With so much talk about Valerian bloodlines this week, I got to thinking about the primary ethnic groups in Westeros. As far as I can tell, there are 4. Valerians, Targaryens and Valerions, the Rhoynar, Dorne, Andals, the Vayne and Arryns, I think, and the First Men, Northern Houses and the Hightowers. Is there a hierarchy du jour in terms of those groups and the desirability in a spouse or ally?
Is there racism in Westeros?
That's what we're asking. Is there racism?
Well, first of all, the Valerians, we need to unpack a little bit. So the Valerians are an ethnic group, right? Descending from old Valeria, the Targaryens, the Valerians come from there. And I think it's important to understand that what makes the Targaryens so special is they are the only surviving dragon-riding family from Valeria. Whether you want to consider that a separate ethnicity from Valerians writ large, I would not. But Valerians are like not uncommon. They colonized a lot of Essos, and the free cities of Essos are significantly populated by descendants of Valerians. So there's a lot of blood out there from Valeria. But the Targaryens are special because, again, they are the only surviving dragon-riding family, and Valeria was an oligarchy. There's no high king, but it was ruled by, its collection of dragon-riding households, of which the Valerians were one. So I think we can call the Valerians an ethnic group, though obviously a very rare one, with the understanding that the Targaryens are set separately above that because they have dragons. The Rhoynar, yes, again hailing from Essos, from the area around the River Rhoyne. The Andals. So the Andals, if you had to create a hierarchy, I think inarguably the dominant culture of Westeros, certainly south of the Neck, and certainly politically, economically, in terms of the way that the kingdom is run. Aegon converted to the faith of the Seven, which is the Andal faith, soon after he took on his conquest, and that was really important politically so that people would accept him. So I think you'd say that the Andals really are the kind of dominant cultural force, ethnic force in Westeros. And then, of course, the First Men, who are still around, still very strong. Of course, north of the Neck is basically First Men country. It's primarily families of pure First Men descent up there with some notable holdouts. The Manderleys come from the south, and they were taken in by the Starks, notably centuries ago. But they come from the south and come from an Andal descent. But yeah, it would be the Andals as kind of the dominant cultural force. The Targaryens had to adopt Andal customs in order to be accepted as the rulers of Westeros. And when they didn't do that, see the rules of Aenys, the second king of Westeros, and Maegor, the absolutely terrible third king, bad things happen, rebellions, wars, etc.
This is a very good catch, and also something I wish Rhaenyra would have possibly considered. So Andrew asks, after Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole get it on, and Daemon spreads his partially true rumor about the princess flatly denies having lost her virtue when she speaks to her father. Is there any way the king sent the moon tea to her more as a test than as an actual remedy?
I guess it's possible. And Viserys is certainly a smart guy. Smart enough to come up with that. Though I think, in terms of his character, probably not manipulative enough to actually carry it out. But I think no. I lean no because Viserys, more than anything, just wants to believe what Rhaenyra tells him. Mm-hmm. And he's got a real blind spot when it comes to her and when it comes to their relationship. Look at how stubborn he's being, in supporting her as Princess of Dragonstone, the crown princess, despite significant blowback that he's getting from everybody. And I think he, more than anything, sent the tea as a way to say, okay, we made this deal, now sign on the dotted line and just drink this, put my mind at ease that there's not going to be any bastards running out here, and let's just move on. So I think no. But you never know.
You never know. You never know. Quicksloth asks, what's up with the Strong family and their dynamics?
The Strongs. Okay, so the Strongs are a ancient house of the Riverlands. Here's a fun fact. They are descended from the First Men. And oftentimes in this story, you can kind of tell who the First Men families are because their names are these shorter, punchier, more, for a lack of a better word, primitive sounding names that are like a reference to something direct, strong. They were a strong. Mud, Stark. Those are the kind of First Men. Royce. These are the kind of names that you often find associated with families descended from the First Men. So that the Strongs come from the First Men. They've been around the Riverlands for a while. We don't exactly know where they hail from, but kind of rewinding to the reign of Maegor the Cruel. So Maegor was married to Alice Haraway. Alice Haraway, there's a lot, I'm simplifying this a lot, but Alice Haraway, Maegor had been trying really hard to create an heir. He knew he had to solidify his hold on the throne because he was fighting a vicious religious war against the kind of like extremist sects of the Faith of the Seven because they didn't accept him, because for various reasons he had usurped the throne, for one, and two, his marriage and relationship proclivities were definitely in defiance of the things that the faith set out. And Alice Haraway ended up giving birth to a stillborn child with no eyes that was, quote, monstrous. And Maegor's reaction to this was that's not mine. My wife is cheating on me. I'm going to kill all the Haraways. So he wipes out the Haraway family. And then he sets up like this big winner-take-all tournament to see who can win Harrenhal, formerly the house of the castle of the Haraways. House Towers wins that. House Towers basically goes broke. When at the end of Maegor's reign, as Jaehaerys is ascending, they had to give up a bunch of land for legal reasons. Their earning power was curtailed. They didn't have any savings. They didn't have a lot of heirs that were young and healthy enough to like carry on the lineage. They made the really, really poor decision of naming one of the kind of last remaining person of their family Maegor after the terrible king that was just ruling. And so eventually that castle came up for grabs because House Towers went extinct and broke, and King Jaehaerys granted it to House Strong. Now here's an interesting thing about House Strong. So it eventually comes into the possession of Lionel Strong, who we know now. Jaehaerys gave Harrenhal to the Strongs, and Bywin Strong became Lord of Harrenhal. Now, Bywin's older brother, Lucamore Strong, was a member of the Kingsguard. Call him Lusty Luke. They call him Lusty Luke because it turned out this guy broke his fucking vows Wilt Chamberlain broke his vows, broke the records in a way that will never be surpassed. He had 3 secret families.
Lifetime movie style.
and a gaggle of children, right? So this comes to light. And this is important because this is context for Cole's reaction, I think, and it certainly would have been something that was in Kristen Cole's mind. So this comes to light. Actually, Ryan Redwine, the previous Lord Commander of the Kingsguard before Sir Harold Westerling, the guy who died in between episodes 1 and 2, they were just like, oh, he died, he was old. Ryan Redwine snitched out Lusty Luke. Lusty Luke appears before the king, throws himself on the king's mercy, right? They brought all his families, all these secret families and his kids there.
They moried him. It was like, you are everyone's father.
Yeah, you are the father of everybody here. And Lusty Luke falls on his knees and he's begging the king's forgiveness, which apparently would have almost happened. Like, Jaehaerys was leaning towards, okay, I'll just send this fucking guy to the wall. Mm-hmm. But then he said, for the good of my family and my children, please, like, don't execute me. And,
Which
like,
family?
Basically, which one? And basically, like, admitting, like, I did it. So they chopped his dick off and they sent him to the wall. This, of course, would have been, you know, one of the things that they tell you in, like, Kingsguard orientation day. Hey, don't be like Lusty Luke. Which was only 30 to 40-ish years ago. It was not
so
like
it's
that.
recent memory.
It's recent memory, and it was a scandalous thing that the fucking common folk absolutely loved. They wrote songs about this guy, and so that's going to be in the back of Kristen Cole's mind, when he reacts the way he does in this episode. Okay, so then Lionel Strong ascends to the castle, and mostly what we know about Lionel is just he is a very quiet guy, a very smart man who holds his tongue. He studied at the Citadel for a while and became an expert at the law, which King Jaehaerys had done a lot to kind of reform and to unify. At that time, there were a bunch of different like local laws, some of which kind of didn't make sense as a cohesive whole when you looked at the realm. And then there were certain areas where they were still doing the prima nocte thing, where the Lord on the wedding night of a couple gets to say, hey, I get to sleep with the woman before anybody else, which was terrible. So there was a lot of reforming, and so Lionel Strong, a student of that reform, became Master of Laws because he was such an expert at it. Lionel's oldest son is Harwin Strong, who we met this episode. Again, breakbones, super, super strong guy. And then his younger son is Larys the Clubfoot, who is showing us, what he's about. So that is how strong. Where do they come from before Harrenhal? We're not actually sure, but somewhere in the Riverlands. We don't know what their seat was. But, we should keep in mind that ever since Harren the Black built Harrenhal and then was burned alive in it shortly thereafter, along with all of his sons, everybody who lives in Harrenhal just encounters problems. We saw what happened with the Harroways. They got wiped out. In Towers, they went broke. They died out. And now it's the Strongs. How will they do? I guess we'll have to see.
How will they fare? Amanda asks, why do you think Daemon went to the Vale?
Unfortunately, I think he went to kill his wife.
I think he went to kill Rhea.
Yeah, I think he very, very clearly went to kill his wife. And I think that's really sad and fucked up. I don't think... there's that moment where he kind of walks away and she's saying, oh, I knew you couldn't finish. And then he turns around and you could kind of convince yourself, oh, he wasn't going to kill her until that, which doesn't make it better. But I think he was just looking for a good enough rock, honestly. So yeah, unfortunately, I think he was going to kill his wife.
I agree, because Viserys basically said, you can't get married to my daughter because you're already married. So he's like, well, I'm going to solve that by killing my wife.
Yeah, very, very unfortunate. Last question.
Okay, George says, is Wildfire on the game board in the era of Hot D? I know it's associated with the Mad King, but was it discovered or developed earlier than his reign?
It's probably not on the table. It was developed earlier in his reign. We first hear about it during the reign of Aegon IV, Aegon the Unworthy, one of the worst kings, Maegor aside. But that is kind of decades after this era. And of course, there's dragons flying around this era. So it's, while it may have been in development by the Alchemist Guild, we don't hear about it until about 174. And, that's 50 some odd years after the story we're seeing now. So my sense is we're not going to see it. That's it for Ask the Maester this week. Love hearing from you. Please send your questions to askthemaester@gmail.com. And don't miss the new HBO original series, House of the Dragon, now streaming on HBO Max Sundays at 9.